why India-UK FTA is also being touted as reverse colonization. Here's how Indian wares are also set to invade the British shores. Let's get you a quick lowdown of that. You have enhanced access to UK markets, which is now going to be provided under the FTA. No duties on 99% of Indian exports to UK. That's going to be a huge one. Then you have desi goods, which are all set to invade UK markets. Which are these goods? We are looking at textiles, which are going to be now much cheaper. Indian textiles are going to be much cheaper, and hence we expect the demand to go up higher in UK. Then you have leather, gems, jewelry, auto parts, furniture, sports goods. Most of them are going to have close to 0% duty when they are exported to UK. Also, Indian garments and textiles, and this is an important one. The current duty that Indian garments, textiles are paying is 8 to 12%, and after FTA, it's going to come down to 0%, which is why it's a big yay as well for farmers, for textile manufacturers, and several others such as gems and jewelry. It's virtually a bonanza for the Indian exporters. Of course, it will ensure duty-free access for nearly 99% of Indian exports, and this unlocks approximately $23 billion in new opportunities, particularly for labor-intensive sectors. Let's tell you how it will be benefiting Indian exporters. Well, there you have it. On marine products, now you're paying 20% tariff. In UK, Indian products after FTA will be paying 0% tariff on it. Textiles and apparels, now we pay 12% tariff. In UK, after FTA, it's going to be 0%. It is going to be free trade. Also, when it comes to Indian chemicals, they were earlier paying 8%. After FTA, 0%. This is how Indian exporters are going to be winning it big as well. Now you have, when it comes to food processing sector, 70% tariff. And after this, the 70% tariff has been cut to 0% tariff. So this is going to be bringing a lot of cheer to the farming community, to the food processing sector as well. But viewers, as you know, this is being called, well, many would like to call it the Kohinoor Trade Pact for India. It was not signed in a hurry. Let's tell you why it is so very significant. Remember, it had taken almost 3 years for us to finalize this deal, to ink this pact. There was no rush timelines, unlike, of course, America, for example. There's also almost 3 years of negotiations which went into where there were regime changes in UK as well that we had to maneuver through. Also, there were negotiations which began in all the way back in 2022. Of course, at that time, there was a different dispensation in UK, and then there was a reset of ties, and many of these, especially when it came to the visa restrictions, which had Rishi Sunak in quite a bind, actually, had been now toned down by the Starmer administration. There were 14 rounds of negotiations which had to take place before FTA finally was inked. It is the first FTA with a G7 nation, and this is very significant. Remember, before that, we've had FTAs with UAE, with Australia, with G7, one of the developed countries of the world. This is the first such free trade agreement that India has inked. Now, it also aims to double bilateral trade by 2030. This is what India is hoping to achieve by the year 2030, to double the amount of exports. Zero duty access to 99% of Indian exports is something that India is looking forward to and manages to get in this one. It also opens opportunities worth $23 billion for India in exports. It's going to be a big win for the Indian farmers, as we are just explaining to you as well. Duty-free exports on 95% of agricultural products, and this is a very significant point as well for Indian agri sector as well. There's no need for UK social security payments for 3 years for 75,000 Indian workers who are working abroad. So that's going to be a big cheer as well for the NRI communities which are living there. There's also 1,800 plus chefs, yoga experts, musicians. All of them can now work in UK each year with easier visa norms. So there you have it, how India is all set to benefit. But let's tell you what Prime Minister Modi had to say during his visit to UK as he inked the iconic and the historic FTA with UK.
ये समझौता मात्र आर्थिक साझेदारी नहीं, बल्कि साझा समृद्धि की योजना है। एक और भारतीय टेक्सटाइल, फुटवियर, जेम्स एंड ज्वेलरी, सी फूड और इंजीनियरिंग गुड्स को यूके में बेहतर मार्केट एक्सेस मिलेगा। भारत के एग्रीकल्चर प्रोड्यूस और प्रोसेस्ड फूड इंडस्ट्री के लिए यूके की मार्केट में नए अवसर बनेंगे।
We have Dr. Ruchi Anandan, who's Associate Professor, General Management at KJSIM. Also, we are being joined by Adam Schwartz, author and a political commentator. I'm going to come across to you first, Adam Schwartz. It's been ages in the making, and finally, after 3 long years, 14 different sets of negotiations, we've managed to ink the FTA with UK. But many have called it reverse colonization of the British Raj by India. Would you agree with that analogy, that Indian ware are all set to now present itself at the UK markets? Reverse colonization.
Well, I wouldn't quite put it in those terms, but I do think that is an important part of the kind of components of the way that really this deal has happened. And really just broadly, just to give you a bit of brief perspective, from the UK's trading point of view, our trading relations have, of course, dramatically changed over the past 5 years due to our withdrawal from the EU and its customs union, which has meant that we have tried to compensate for that loss of preferential access to UK markets through trying to agree deals with other countries. And really for a long time, India has been one of the major trade targets for trying to agree one of those deals. I would say broadly kind of for 3 reasons. The first, of course, is that India is going to become one of the world's major powers, even larger than it already is. Secondly, because, of course, of the shared democratic values broadly that the UK has with India. But thirdly, kind of onto your point, because of the deep cultural ties that the UK actually has with India, we have 2 million people of Indian origin in the UK who've made a major contribution to British society. And, Starmer didn't quite put it in this terminology this morning when he was speaking with Prime Minister Modi. But really, I kind of see this as an important part of addressing and kind of reconciling with the UK's kind of legacy of colonialism with India, really. And of course, this deal, talks about, and a lot of it is to do with economics and reducing tariff barriers and non-trade barriers. But really, this goes beyond a traditional trade deal and actually goes beyond that to say that, these 2 countries are going to cooperate to try to, work together to take on some of the world's biggest problems for the next century, whether it's on climate change or on immigration, on AI or on crime. So really, I think, that is part of a recognition that actually the UK does need to have a shared future in terms of trying to take on the biggest challenges, I think in recognition of its past with India.
Very interesting, given the kind of history the 2 nations have had. Now, Dr. Anandan, if we look at, for example, Scotch and Gin, the import duty is going to come down from 150% to 75%, but in the next 4 years, in the next 10 years, it's going to come down to 40%. So FTA, would it be right? It is a free trade agreement which is still in the process. The long-term gains are going to be much higher than what appears to be even now, especially when it comes to no duties on 90% of Indian wares, 99% of India's exports to UK.
Yeah, so I think this is classic win-win, which is what international trade is all about. So if you think back to what we all studied in school, something called the Ricardian theory of comparative advantage, which is you basically make and sell what you're really very, very good at. And so if you look at this deal, it's very, very complementary, right? So what the UK is really getting to sell in India are the high-end products, right? And that's where there's no overlap, right? It's not really hurting any Indian manufacturers. And what the Indians are getting in return is access to the domestic UK market, both in terms of and so when you look at what are these sectors that benefit in India, these are basically the labor-intensive sectors, right? And again, that doesn't hurt the UK economy at all, right? It actually brings down costs very substantially. If you can lower your costs in terms of IT support, that's going to happen. You lower your costs in terms of garments, in terms of footwear, etc. That's going to happen, and there's also, in the longer run, there's also going to be a lot of cost reductions for the UK in terms of pharmaceuticals also, right? And that again is something that there's very little competition between British and Indian industry. So this is actually the best deal that you could think of.
Well, absolutely, Dr. Ananda. The fact that there are no overlaps when it comes, and especially India gets to gain a lot because it is going to be the labor-intensive sectors which are likely to gain from that. Adam Schwartz, one of the biggest sticking points, well, over the last 3 years, earlier, which had your earlier dispensation, the Rishi Sunak dispensation, in a bit of a bind, was that about visas. That is a key component under Starmac for this, in this case. Do you think that was one of the biggest takeaways for the FTA, especially for the Indian diaspora there? The visa norms and how they have been tweaked now to better help ensure that they have the quality of life. The visas are much more accessible as well.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think this is one of the major issues, certainly for India, in terms of wanting better access for Indian workers to UK markets, as well as, for new and existing workers and companies in the UK. And I think ultimately, India still would have liked for it to have gone further than it did. But I think the fact that ultimately the UK did ultimately agree to more access for Indian workers does show that actually this is still a major win for the Indian government, and of course for Indian workers as well, particularly in relation to the fact that temporary Indian workers are no longer going to have to pay, as well as the companies the Indian companies they work for social security contributions, which on average, makes up for about 20% of the costs of Indian companies. So I think that is going to be a major win that will ultimately, of course, increase business both for India and the UK. But as I say, I think ultimately this is partly a climb down from India, but really, you do get that in every single trade negotiation where one side wants much more of something and ultimately doesn't get quite as much. But still, I think this is certainly a great framework and a groundwork for what could be, maybe even further restrictions going forward in future.
And this is very interesting, Dr. Anandan, if I can come to you. Would you say that the trends really have been reversed when it comes to the age-old traditions of protectionism that India has always shown when it came to its economy, and now it's all open for free trade? We've had one in UAE, we've had one with Australia 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, by now, and this time around with one of the G7 nations as well. The way forward for India to ensure that $1 trillion of annual exports that they are hoping to gain by 2030, are we on track for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, one of the things that we really have to understand is, why is India going for FTAs? And one of the main reasons is that is our foreign exchange reserves, right? So if we did not have the foreign exchange reserves, we would, be wary of a, short-term import surge, which puts pressure on balance of payments, etc. And this is what used to happen in India, right?
Yes.
But when you look at the last 10 years, what you'll find is that that's not a problem any longer. So, any temporary import surge, because, a lot of people want to drink Scotch and drive Aston Martins, that's not going to be a problem for India in terms of, the balance of payments and foreign exchange reserves, etc. And so the great thing is that this is, again, if you look at the size of the deal, it's something that's very manageable for India compared to if they were to do a deal with, say, the US.
Absolutely. And as we are speaking, it's not just about the Scotch, which, of course, all of us would love to have better Scotch, cheaper Scotch, and, of course, the Aston Martins. All of that is very important. But imagine 95% of the agricultural products also, which are going to be exported rather, to UK from India, are now going to be duty-free. No taxes on that. So imagine what the larger quantum is going to be over the next 10 years. Remember, FTA is not just what happens today, but over the next 10 years, the way it's going to be phasing out. Win-win situation, a Kohinoor of an FTA, if we can call it that. Thank you so much, Rishi Anandan, for joining us here on the show, as well as Adam Schwartz. Without a short break, don't go anywhere.